The distress signal had been broadcasting for 6 hours before anyone answered. Commander Saravix of the research vessel Horizon's Edge sat in her command chair watching the response board with growing despair. Around her, the ship groaned. Not metaphorically. The actual hull made sounds now, stress fractures spreading through sections that had been compromised in the engine failure. Her crew of 847 researchers, scientists, and support staff moved through the corridors in organized groups, conserving oxygen, conserving heat, conserving everything while the ship slowly died around them. The engine room no longer existed in any functional sense. 3 hours into a routine deep space survey mission, something in the tertiary drive system had cascaded into a catastrophic failure that took out primary propulsion, backup propulsion, and the emergency maneuvering thrusters in sequence. Chief Engineer Voss, a Krell with 40 years of experience, had looked at the damage and told Saravik simply that he had never seen anything like it and had no idea how to fix it. They were 4.3 light-years from the nearest inhabited system, drifting in the dark, and their life support had 72 hours of capacity remaining at current consumption rates. Saravix had sent distress signals to every registered vessel and station within theoretical response range. The responses had been honest, which she appreciated even as they destroyed her hope one by one. The Zelthian Republic vessel Sunrise had responded first. Captain Threx had been genuinely apologetic. His ship was 6.2 days away even at maximum speed. He was already calculating whether any of his crew could be transferred to a faster vessel to reduce that time. The math did not work. 6 days was not 72 hours. The Krell Dominion patrol ship Iron Resolve was 8.1 days away. They had already contacted their command structure, requesting emergency authorization to exceed standard speed limits. Authorization came back within an hour. It changed nothing. 8.1 days remained 8.1 days. The Confederation Emergency Response Vessel Steadfast Promise was the closest non-human ship at 4.9 days. Their captain had wept openly on the communication channel, a display of emotion that Saravix found both touching and deeply unhelpful. Weeping did not move ships faster. 17 other vessels had responded with similar calculations. Everyone was sorry. Everyone wished they could help. Everyone was too far away. Saravix's first officer, a Velorum named Drex whose carapace had gone the pale blue-white of extreme stress, stood at her shoulder reviewing the response board. The Zelthian vessel is requesting we ration life support to extend the window. If we reduce heating to minimum survival thresholds and put the non-essential crew into emergency stasis, we might stretch to 90 hours. We do not have stasis pods for 847 people, Saravix said. We have 200 medical stasis units in the research bays. Then we choose 200 people to survive and 647 to die slowly in the cold. That is not a choice I will make. Drex was quiet, he understood. There was no good answer here. Saravix sent another round of distress signals, widening the broadcast range. The signal would take hours to reach more distant systems. By the time any vessel there could respond and travel, the math remained impossible. She was preparing a final log entry, the kind that described the situation clearly for whoever eventually found the ship's black box, when the communication board chimed with a new response. The signal quality was poor, crackling with interference from a dense pocket of interstellar dust between the transmission source and the horizon's edge. The translation matrix struggled briefly before locking onto the language pattern. Horizon's Edge, this is Captain Marcus Webb of the independent cargo freighter Endless Road. We received your distress signal approximately 40 minutes ago. I want to be honest with you about our situation before I tell you what we're going to do. We are a civilian cargo freighter. We have a crew of 6. Our vessel is not equipped for emergency rescue operations and is rated for a maximum of 50 passengers under comfortable conditions. None of that matters. We are currently 11.3 hours away running on maximum burn. We are coming. Keep your people calm, keep your life support optimized, and transmit your complete ship schematics to us immediately. We are going to need time to figure this out. Web out. The bridge went silent. Saravix read the transmission twice. Then she looked at Drex. Drex's carapace had shifted from stress blue to something she had no name for, a color she had never seen on a Velorum. One ship, Drex said. Civilian, 6 humans, rated for 50 passengers. He paused. They're coming anyway. They're coming anyway, Saravix confirmed. She transmitted the ship schematics. The Endless Roads response came back within 20 minutes. Not from Captain Webb, but from someone who identified herself only as Kowalski, and whose title apparently was Chief Engineer, though the informality of her communication style suggested the Endless Roads crew operated without excessive concern for protocol. Okay, I've gone through your schematics. Here's what I'm seeing. Your primary life support is shot, but your backup systems are still functional, just running inefficiently because of power rerouting issues from the engine failure. I can fix that, but I'm going to need to physically access your distribution nodes in sections 7, 12, and 19. When we dock, I'll need immediate access. Also, you have a secondary atmospheric processor in your science bay that's been running at 30% capacity because someone programmed it wrong. That's been costing you oxygen for probably months. When I fix it, you'll gain back maybe 8 hours of life support capacity. Your heating system is different. That's actually not fixable remotely, and you're going to want to consolidate your crew into the central sections because maintaining heat across the whole ship is burning resources you need elsewhere. Move everyone to sections 3 through 8, now ideally before we arrive. Questions? Saravix stared at the message. Then she started giving orders. Within an hour, 847 crew members had been consolidated into the central sections of the horizon's edge. It was uncomfortable. Species that preferred cool environments were pressed against species that preferred warmth. Krell researchers who needed humidity found themselves next to the Raxian scientists who found moisture physically irritating. But they were alive and they were conserving heat, and that was what mattered. Drex had pulled up everything available on the Endless Road in the Galactic Shipping Registry. It was not impressive reading. The ship was 22 years old, a mid-size cargo hauler that had changed ownership 3 times. Its listed cargo capacity was 40,000 tons of general freight. Its crew roster showed 6 names. Current registered cargo run was a routine delivery of agricultural equipment from Velorum Station to the Krell frontier colonies, which explained why they were in this region of space at all. They were just passing by, Drex said. Routine cargo run. They heard the signal and turned around. They burned 11 hours of fuel to reach us, Saravix said. That's not their route, that's not their mission, they just turned around. Because someone had to, Drex said, and the phrase landed with a weight that neither of them immediately understood but both felt. Captain Marcus Webb contacted her personally 90 minutes before their estimated arrival. His face on the screen was not what Saravix had expected, though she realized she had not known what to expect from a human cargo captain. He was older, perhaps in his 60s by human standards, with the kind of face that suggested extended exposure to problems. Gray at the temples, eyes that assessed things quickly and without drama. He wore a faded jacket with no insignia, except a small patch she could not read. Commander Saravix, he said, I want to walk you through our plan before we arrive so we're not wasting time explaining things when every minute matters. Please, she said. My engineer Kowalski is going to dock and immediately go to work on your life support issues. She'll extend your window by at least 18 hours based on what she's seen in your schematics. Maybe more. My Dr. Chen is going to set up in your medical bay. She's trained for a crew of 8, but she's good and she's resourceful, and she'll tell you what she needs to make it work for 847. Webb leaned forward slightly. Here's the harder conversation. Even with Kowalski's fixes, even with your extended window, you have 847 people, and we have a ship that supports 50 comfortably. We can push that to maybe 150 with significant discomfort and some medical management. That's not 847. I understand the math, Saravik said. The math isn't finished yet. Webb replied. Our navigator Yuki found a gravitational slingshot trajectory around a red dwarf 0.8 light-years from your position. If we can get your ship moving even minimally, we can use that gravity well to accelerate toward the nearest inhabited system. Cuts the distance significantly. Kowalski thinks she can restore maybe 15% thrust capacity to your secondary maneuvering systems. That's not enough to fly, but it might be enough to position for the slingshot. If that works, we're talking about cutting the rescue timeline from 5 days to 31 hours. Saravix processed this. The Confederation vessel is 4.9 days away. If we can reduce that to 31 hours. Everyone makes it, Webb finished. That's the plan. It's a plan with about 12 things that can go wrong. But it's a plan, and right now a plan with 12 failure points beats no plan at all. What do you need from us? Keep your people calm. Have someone ready to assist Kowalski immediately. Clear your navigation bay so Yuki can integrate with your systems. And honestly, tell your crew that help is coming, because I've found that people hold on better when they know someone's actually trying. Saravix found herself looking at this human cargo captain, this man who had turned his routine freight run into a desperate rescue operation because he happened to be closest, and feeling something she could not immediately name. Captain Webb, she said, why are you doing this? You are a cargo freighter. This is not your mission. The risk to your vessel and crew is significant. Webb appeared to think about this genuinely, as if the question deserved a real answer rather than a reflexive one. Horizon's Edge sent a distress signal. We received it. We're the closest ship that can respond in time. Those are the facts. The rest of it, the risk analysis, the mission parameters, what we're equipped for, what we're rated for, that's all secondary to the basic fact that 847 people are going to die if someone doesn't try. He paused. We can try, so we're trying. That's the whole calculation. He ended the transmission. Drex had been listening. The Velorum first officer stood very still for a moment. I want to understand something about humans, he said finally. Is that reasoning typical for them? Someone needs help, you can try to help, therefore you try, without further calculation. I believe so, Saravik said. I have read about it, but I did not fully understand it until just now. It seems inefficient, Drex said. It seems, Saravik said carefully, like the reason 847 people might survive today. The endless road arrived exactly on schedule, which Saravix later learned was unusual enough that Webb mentioned it with mild surprise. It was smaller than she had imagined from its registry specs, a compact vessel with the slightly battered look of a ship that worked for a living. The hull showed repair patches in at least 4 places. One of the running lights was a slightly different shade than the others, suggesting replacement at some point. It was not an impressive vessel by any military or scientific standard. It was the most beautiful thing Saravix had seen in her life. Docking completed with mechanical efficiency. The airlock opened. The Endless Road's crew came aboard. Kowalski arrived first, which Saravix later understood was entirely predictable. The human engineer was perhaps 40 years old, carrying a tool kit so large it was technically a tool system rather than a kit, and she was already reading something on a handheld device while walking. She did not stop moving or look up when she addressed Saravix. Commander, I need someone who knows this ship's layout to take me directly to the distribution node in Section 12 first. The others I can find from the schematics, but 12 is the critical one, and I want to see it before anything else. Also, I need authorization to override your engineer's safety lockouts on the backup systems because the lockouts are part of the problem. Your engineer won't like it. Tell them I'm sorry, but it needs to happen. I will inform Chief Engineer Voss, Saravix said. Great. Also, I've been awake for 31 hours, so if I seem abrupt, I apologize, but I'm not going to get less abrupt until everyone's safe, so let's just work with that. She finally looked up from her device, made brief eye contact with Saravix, and appeared to make some kind of rapid assessment. You're handling this well. Most commanders I've seen in crisis situations are either too calm, which means they're in shock, or too loud, which means they're in panic. You seem like you're actually thinking. That helps. Then she was moving again, following the crew member Saravix had designated as her guide. Dr. Chen arrived next. She was younger than Saravix expected, perhaps mid-30s, and she carried medical bags that clearly represented the endless road's entire medical inventory. She introduced herself with a quiet efficiency that reminded Saravix of certain surgeons she had known, people who existed in a state of perpetual calm readiness. Commander Saravix, I've reviewed what species composition data you transmitted. I have to be honest about my limitations. I'm trained primarily for human physiology with secondary training in Velorum and Krell medicine, because those are the species I most commonly work near on our routes. For the other species on your ship, I'm going to need your medical staff to work with me closely, and I'm going to be making some judgment calls that your doctors might find unorthodox. I want everyone to know in advance that unorthodox is not the same as wrong. Understood, Saravix said. Our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Relith, will work directly with you. Good. I also want to say something that might sound strange. Chen paused, and for the first time her calm flickered slightly. I know the situation is very serious, but I need your crew to not be afraid of us. Humans in crisis situations can seem intense in ways that other species sometimes find alarming. We're not alarming, we're just focused. If my colleagues seem like they're moving too fast or talking too directly or making decisions without enough consultation, please understand it's not disrespect for your crew or your authority. It's just how we work when time matters. I will communicate this to the crew, Saravix said. Thank you. Chen moved toward the medical bay. Navigator Yuki came through the airlock next, and Saravix experienced a moment of confusion because Yuki appeared to be approximately 19 years old. This seemed wrong. Saravix checked her assumption against the young human's bearing and found that yes, 19 seemed about right, and yes, this person was apparently the navigator responsible for the gravitational slingshot calculation that represented their best hope of survival. Commander Saravix, Yuki said, bowing in what appeared to be a gesture of respect. I'm sorry we couldn't arrive sooner. I've been working on the trajectory calculation since we turned around. I have 3 possible slingshot approaches, and I want to review them with your navigation team to confirm I haven't missed anything in your ship's handling characteristics. The best-case scenario gets you to the Confederation vessel in 29 hours. The worst-case scenario gets you there in 34 hours. Both are well within the extended life support window, assuming Kowalski's fixes work. And if they don't work, Saravix asked. Yuki's expression did not waver. Then we moved to contingency planning. But I've watched Kowalski work for 2 years and I've never seen her not fix something. So I'm planning for the good scenarios. She proceeded to the navigation bay. Santos and Webb arrived together. Santos was introduced as the Endless Roads cook, which appeared to be an inadequate description of her actual role. She carried equipment that Saravix did not immediately recognize. I've been converting our food processing systems, Santos explained, unprompted. Oxygen recyclers, jury-rigged from cooking equipment, which sounds insane, but the underlying technology is more similar than you'd think. I've got enough material to supplement your life support in 3 sections. It won't be pretty and it might smell like whatever we were cooking last, which was unfortunately fish, but it'll work. Saravix stared at her. You converted your cooking equipment into oxygen recyclers during the flight here. Captain Webb said we needed more oxygen capacity. We had cooking equipment in 11 hours. Yes. Santos moved off toward the section she had identified in the schematics. Saravix watched her go. Webb stood in the airlock corridor looking at Saravix with the same direct assessment she had seen on the communication screen. Up close, he was slightly shorter than she had expected, but carried himself with the particular quality she associated with people who had been responsible for other people's lives for a long time. "How are your crew holding up?" he asked. "Better now that you're here," she said honestly. "Good. Fear burns oxygen faster than most people realize. Keep them informed, keep them occupied where possible, and tell them the plan is working even before it is, because the plan working starts with people believing it will." He glanced around at the corridors. "I need to see your secondary maneuvering systems with your chief engineer. Kowalski thinks she can restore 15% thrust, but she's going to need someone who knows this specific system's quirks." "I will take you there myself," Saravix said. As they walked, she found herself studying the human captain the way she might study a new research subject, not with clinical detachment, but with genuine curiosity. "You mentioned you were military before cargo," she said. 20 years, Webb confirmed. "Earth's unified fleet, retired as a commander." "Why cargo?" He was quiet for a moment in a way that suggested the question had a real answer that he was deciding whether to give. "I got tired of situations where the mission came first and people came second. Cargo's simpler. Cargo doesn't bleed." He paused. "Usually." They arrived at the secondary maneuvering systems. Chief Engineer Voss, the Krell who had looked at the damage 72 hours ago and seen nothing fixable, was waiting. He was not a small being, and he carried the focused despair of an engineer who had spent 3 days watching a ship die around him. Webb looked at the systems for approximately 30 seconds before beginning to ask questions. Specific, technical questions that surprised Voss enough that the Krell responded with full engineering detail, rather than the simplified explanations he usually provided to non-engineers. Within 10 minutes they were deep in discussion. Within 30 minutes Voss was nodding in a way that looked like cautious hope. Saravix left them to it and returned to the bridge. The next 6 hours were unlike anything in her experience. The endless road's crew moved through the horizon's edge like a force of nature, but a precisely directed force. Nothing wasted, nothing dramatic, everything purposeful. Kowalski spent 4 hours in the bowels of the life support system. Saravix received updates every 30 minutes. Section 12 distribution node fixed, gaining 6 hours. Atmospheric processor in Science Bay recalibrated, gaining additional 4 hours. Secondary oxygen generation brought online, gaining 3 more. Each update was delivered flatly, without celebration, as if these were simply items being crossed off a list, rather than hours of life being restored to 847 people. Chen set up in the medical bay with Dr. Relith and proceeded to organize a triage system that covered species Saravix had not known Chen had any training in. When asked about this later, Chen explained that she had spent the 11-hour flight reading every xenobiology reference in the Endless Roads database and had memorized the critical care protocols for the 12 species she had not previously known. 11 hours. Memorized. Yuki worked with the navigation team for 2 hours, checking and rechecking trajectory calculations with a thoroughness that the Horizon's Edge navigators found slightly overwhelming, but ultimately deeply reassuring. The gravitational slingshot trajectory was confirmed viable. The best-case scenario remained 29 hours to interception with the Confederation vessel. Santos installed her improvised oxygen recyclers in sections 3, 5, and 7. They hummed and they did smell like fish, but they worked, which was the only specification that mattered. Webb and Voss restored 18% thrust capacity to the secondary maneuvering systems, exceeding Kowalski's estimate by 3%, which Webb reported to Saravix with the same matter-of-fact tone he used for everything. At hour 6, Kowalski emerged from the life support systems looking like someone who had been in combat, covered in lubricants and coolant, and something that might have been insulation foam. She reported directly to Webb without cleaning up first, which told Saravik something about their working relationship. Life support window extended from 72 hours to 103 hours from current moment, Kowalski said. The fish oxygen recyclers add another 4 hours on top of that. Total survival window is now 107 hours. Yuki's best case trajectory is 29 hours, Webb said. Then we have a very comfortable margin, Kowalski said. She looked at Saravix. Everyone's going to be fine. She said it not as reassurance but as a technical statement of fact, the same way she might report that a component was functioning within normal parameters. Saravix felt something release in her chest that she had not fully recognized as tension until it was gone. "Thank you," she said. Kowalski appeared briefly uncertain how to receive this. "I'm going to sleep for 3 hours now," she said, and walked to the nearest available space, lay down on the floor, and appeared to immediately lose consciousness. Webb watched this with the expression of someone observing a completely normal event. "She does that," he said. "She'll be fine." The Horizon's Edge began its maneuvering sequence 4 hours later, the repaired secondary thrusters pushing the stricken vessel into position for the gravitational slingshot. It was slow and imprecise work, like steering a building with a bicycle, but it was movement, and movement meant trajectory, and trajectory meant the red dwarf's gravity could do what the broken engines could not. Saravik stood on the bridge watching the maneuver with Yuki beside her, the young human navigator monitoring every adjustment with quiet intensity. Around them, crew members from 17 different species watched displays showing the ship's position relative to the planned trajectory. Some were crying. Some were communicating with families in recorded messages that would be transmitted when they reached a relay point. Some were simply watching the screens with the particular focused stillness of beings who understood that the next hours would determine whether they were alive or a memorial. "You're very young for this work," Saravik said to Yuki. The navigator did not take her eyes off her display. "Captain Webb gave me my first posting. I'd applied to the Confederation Navigation Corps and was rejected for being too young. Webb reviewed my test scores and offered me the job." Does he often make decisions like that, based on capability rather than convention? "He makes decisions based on what needs doing and who can do it," Yuki said. "He says credentials are what you have when you haven't proven yourself yet. After that, they're just paperwork." Saravix considered this. Is that why he turned around when he received our signal? Because what needed doing was clear. Yuki finally glanced at her. "I asked him that during the flight here. When we turned around, I did the math on the situation. 847 people, 6 of us, ship rated for 50. I told him the numbers didn't work. He said the numbers never work until someone makes them work. Then he told me to find a trajectory that cut our travel time and stopped talking about whether we should come and started talking about how we were going to save everyone." She returned to her display. "He's been like that the whole time I've known him. He doesn't ask whether, he asks how." The slingshot maneuver executed over 14 hours. Yuki monitored every second with a concentration so complete that she ate without looking at her food and communicated in clipped sentences that Saravix learned to interpret precisely. Nominal meant on track. Adjusting meant a minor correction. Watching meant something needed attention. Yuki never said anything was wrong because nothing was wrong. The trajectory held. When the Horizon's Edge came out of the slingshot on the correct vector, accelerating toward the rendezvous point with the Confederation vessel, Yuki permitted herself a brief closed-eye pause that might have been relief, or might have been the first microsecond of sleep she had allowed herself in 30 hours. "Nominal," she said, and this time the word carried a weight of satisfaction. Webb was on the bridge. He heard it and nodded once. "Good work," he said, and the simplicity of it somehow made it more meaningful than elaborate praise would have been. They were 14 hours from rendezvous with the Confederation vessel when the alert sounded. Saravix was in the middle of an update call with the incoming steadfast promise, when Voss's voice came over the bridge channel with a controlled urgency she had learned to read as serious. "Commander, we have a problem." She excused herself from the call. "Report." "Hull breach. Section 11. Small, maybe 2 meters across, but we missed it in the original damage assessment because it was behind a collapsed storage unit. It has been slowly venting atmosphere. The rate is increasing as we continue to maneuver." Voss's voice remained professional. "At current rate, we lose the atmosphere buffer in Section 7 through 11. Life support can compensate for the first 4 hours. After that, we begin losing breathable atmosphere in the central sections, where the crew is consolidated." "Timeline?" Webb asked. He had come to stand at Saravix's shoulder without her noticing. 4 hours of compensation. Then the atmosphere in sections 3 through 8 begins degrading. At full degradation rate, we're looking at conditions becoming dangerous in approximately 6 hours from breach onset. Saravix did the math. They were 14 hours from the Confederation vessel. Webb did the math faster. "Can we seal it remotely?" "No. The breach is in a section where remote systems are offline. It requires a physical repair from outside the hull." "Kowalski," Webb said. "Kowalski's suit took damage during the Section 12 work," Voss said. "I've reviewed it. The suit will maintain integrity for approximately 40 minutes of EVA. The repair will take 60 to 90 minutes minimum." Another silence, shorter. "My suit," Webb said. "Captain's suit is rated for 90 minutes standard EVA," Voss confirmed. "However, the repair requires going into a compressed section of the hull exterior. The space is very tight. Captain Webb's build will make it difficult. The repair time increases to possibly 110 minutes. "Possibly," Webb said. "Captain," Saravix said. Webb looked at her. "The probability of your suit maintaining integrity for 110 minutes at this temperature, and given the level of activity required, is about 30%, Kowalski said. She had materialized at some point, apparently having slept her 3 hours and returned without announcement. She was reviewing the breach data on a handheld. Her voice was flat. "Suit will most likely fail at around the 70-minute mark. You'll have maybe 10 minutes of emergency reserves after that. If the repair isn't done in 80 minutes, you'll be outside in vacuum with a failed suit." "Can you extend the suit's integrity?" Webb asked her. "I've been thinking about that for the last 2 minutes. Yes. Patching 3 specific stress points will add maybe 15 minutes, so 95 minutes instead of 80. Is 95 minutes enough? If you work fast and the breach is exactly what the sensors say it is, and you don't run into complications, yes. If any of those things are different, no." Webb nodded. "Start the patches." "Captain Webb," Saravix said. She was aware of Drex and Yuki and several of her own crew watching from around the bridge. "The Endless Road crew has already taken significant risk to reach us. I cannot ask you to." "You're not asking," Webb said, not unkindly, simply as a statement of how things were. 847 people won me. That's the calculation, Commander." "It is not a calculation I am comfortable with." "I understand that." He met her eyes. "But it's still the calculation. If I don't go, how many people die?" She could not answer. "That's the answer," he said. "I'll be careful." Yuki moved from her station. The young navigator's face had gone very still in a way that Saravix recognized as the expression of someone maintaining control through considerable effort. "Captain, I can." "No," Webb said. It was not harsh, but it was absolute. "You fly this ship. That's your job right now, and it's essential. I need you here." "But, Yuki," he said it quietly, "how many people are on this ship?" A pause. 847. "Right, so fly the ship." She returned to her station. Saravix watched the young navigator sit down, position her hands on the controls, and become very precisely focused on the trajectory displays. Her hands were perfectly steady. This was, Saravix understood, an act of considerable will. Webb and Kowalski disappeared to prepare the suit. Saravix received them in the external equipment bay 10 minutes later. Kowalski was working on the suit with the same focused speed she brought to everything, applying patches to 3 points on the torso and 1 on the left arm while simultaneously explaining to Webb what each patch would and would not do. "The arm patch is the one I'm least confident about," Kowalski said. "There's microfracturing in the material around it that I can't fully address. If you put stress on that arm, keep it to a minimum." "Noted," Webb said. "Also, the heating element in the left boot has reduced efficiency. Keep moving. Don't stay still long enough for your feet to get cold." "Noted." Also, Kowalski paused, and for the first time Saravix saw something in her expression that was not focused efficiency. It was there very briefly. "Be fast." "Always am," Webb said. Kowalski secured the last patch. Webb checked the suit systems with the methodical attention of someone who had done EVA work many times. Saravix noted that he did not rush this part, despite the urgency. Careful in preparation, presumably, so that speed was possible in execution. Dr. Chen appeared at the bay door. She looked at Webb with the same controlled expression Yuki had shown, the expression of someone who understood the math and did not like it. She did not say anything. She held up a small medical injector. "Antihypothermia compound," she said. "It won't stop cold from being dangerous, but it'll delay the point at which it becomes critical by about 15 minutes. Webb held out his arm. Chen administered it without ceremony. "Thank you," Webb said. "Come back," Chen said, which was not a medical recommendation, but which seemed to be the most important thing she had to say. Webb sealed his helmet. The external bay doors opened. The void of deep space filled the opening, absolute and indifferent. Webb moved to the edge, checked his tether, and stepped out. Saravix moved to the exterior camera feeds. Drex stood beside her. Neither spoke. The breach was in a compressed section of the hull between 2 structural members, exactly as the sensors had described. Saravix watched Webb navigate the exterior of her ship, moving hand over hand along the hull with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before, which she knew from his file he had, many times in his military career. He reached the breach site at 11 minutes. Saravix's timer was running in the corner of the display. The repair required sealing a stress fracture that had opened into a full breach, applying sealant compound, and reinforcing the surrounding hull material to prevent the repair from failing under continued atmospheric pressure. In a maintenance bay with full equipment and no time pressure, Voss estimated this would take 40 minutes. In a compressed exterior space in vacuum with a suit under stress, the estimate was 60 to 90 minutes. Webb worked at a pace that was neither rushed nor careful. It was precise. Every movement had purpose, no wasted motion, no hesitation. Saravix found herself watching his hands through the camera feed, the gloved fingers working with a specificity that seemed impossible in the restrictive environment of a vacuum suit. At 30 minutes, Kowalski reported that suit integrity was nominal, good. At 45 minutes, the repair was perhaps 60% complete, still on track. At 60 minutes, Kowalski's voice came over the channel quietly. "Suit integrity dropping faster than projected on the torso. The patched section is under more stress than expected. Recalculating." A pause. "Captain, you have approximately 25 minutes of full suit integrity remaining. After that, you have 10 minutes of emergency reserves." 35 minutes total, Webb said. His voice was unchanged. He was still working. "Yes." "How much repair time left?" A different pause, longer, 25 to 35 minutes. Another silence. "Keep working," Webb said. Saravix became aware that the bridge had gone very quiet. She turned to find that a significant portion of the Horizon's Edge crew had gathered in the corridors leading to the bridge, watching the displays. 847 people whose lives depended on the human working outside their ship in a failing suit, and they were watching. Yuki's hands were still steady on the navigation controls. Her eyes were on the trajectory displays. She did not look at the exterior feeds. This was, Saravix understood, a choice. At 70 minutes, Webb's voice came over the channel. "I need a status on suit integrity." Kowalski answered immediately. "The torso patch failed. You're on emergency reserves." Time remaining on reserves: 10 minutes, maybe 12, with the anti-hypothermia compound. How much repair time? 8 to 12 minutes. Another silence. Saravix was watching the timer and watching Webb's hands and doing math that kept coming out as a razor-thin margin. "Keep working," Webb said. He worked faster. Not recklessly, but faster, the pace of someone who had recalculated the parameters and adjusted without commentary. Sierra Vix watched the repair progress. The sealant compound was almost fully applied. The reinforcement material needed positioning. At 78 minutes, the suit's communication system began to flicker. "Captain," Kowalski said. "I know," Webb said, "almost done." At 80 minutes, the communication system failed. The external camera still showed him working. The repair was 90% complete, maybe 95%. Sierra Vix could not tell from the feed. Kowalski was watching the suit telemetry. "Suit temperature dropping," she said quietly. "He's in cold now." At 83 minutes, Webb stopped moving. The bridge was absolutely silent. Then he moved again, slower but deliberate. He positioned the last reinforcement panel. His movements had become slightly imprecise, the early signs of hypothermia affecting fine motor control, but the reinforcement panel was large enough that imprecision was acceptable. At 86 minutes, he activated the emergency locator beacon on his suit. Sierra Vix understood immediately. He had finished the repair, and he was using his last power to mark his position because he did not have power to return on his own. "Kowalski," Sierra Vix said. "Already suiting up," Kowalski said. She was already moving. Kowalski SEVA took 11 minutes. She reached Webb S position, secured a secondary tether, and began moving back toward the ship. Webb was moving, barely, assisted by Kowalski, the two figures making slow progress across the hull. They were inside at 97 minutes. Chen was waiting. She had Webb S helmet off before the bay had fully repressurized, checking his core temperature with the focus speed Sierra Vix had come to associate with her. Webb was conscious, which Sierra Vix had not been certain he would be. His skin was wrong, the color humans turned when they were dangerously cold, and he was shaking in a way that seemed inconsistent with the controlled stillness he had displayed for the past 2 days. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was imprecise in a way that meant he was not fine. "You're not fine," Chen said, "but you're going to be. Lie still." "Breach?" he asked. "Sealed," Kowalski said. She was still in her suit, helmet off, watching Chen work. "Good repair, it'll hold." Webb appeared to find this adequate. He stopped talking and let Chen do her work. Sierra Vix stood in the bay doorway watching. Drex had followed her. Behind them both, crew members from the Horizon's Edge filled the corridor, 17 species representing hundreds of individual beings, watching the human captain be treated for hypothermia incurred while saving all of them. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then a Krell researcher near the back said something in his own language that Sierra Vix S translation matrix rendered as, "They came for us anyway." It passed through the corridor in whispers, translated into 17 languages, becoming something different in each one but meaning the same thing in all of them. "They came for us anyway." The Confederation vessel's steadfast promise made rendezvous 14 hours later, which was 31 hours ahead of its original arrival time, which was the number Yuki had calculated in the first hour of the Endless Road's approach. The life support on the horizon's edge was at 73% of its extended capacity when the docking collar connected, meaning they had substantial margin remaining. All 847 crew members of the Horizon's Edge transferred to the Steadfast Promise in good health. Dr. Chen transferred with them, accompanying the 3 crew members who had developed medical conditions during the crisis and who she had been treating with what she described as improvised but effective methods. Webb was transferred on a medical stretcher, which he objected to, and then stopped objecting to when Chen said something to him quietly that Sierra Vix did not hear, but that apparently constituted a compelling argument. As Sierra Vix prepared to board the Steadfast Promise, she turned to look at the endless road one more time. The small cargo freighter sat at docking collar 3, its mismatched running light visible, its patched hull showing the accumulated history of a working ship. It looked, she thought, like exactly what it was. A vessel that worked for a living, a ship that did what was needed. She went to find Webb in the medical section of the Steadfast Promise. He was sitting up, which suggested Chen had lost the argument about lying down. His color was better. He was reviewing something on a handheld device, which Sierra Vix suspected was related to whatever their next cargo run was scheduled to be. "Commander Sierra Vix," he said. "Captain Webb." She stood at the entrance to his bay, aware that they had spent 2 days in crisis together and had not yet had a conversation that was not entirely functional. "I wanted to speak with you while I had the opportunity." Of course, he set down the handheld. She was quiet for a moment, gathering what she wanted to say. "You will face consequences for what you did," she said. "I have reviewed the relevant regulations. A civilian cargo vessel responding to a distress call without adequate equipment and crew is in violation of at least 14 separate safety protocols. The Confederation and the Shipping Authority will both want to speak with you." "I'm aware," Webb said. "I want you to know that every crew member of the Horizon's Edge will testify on your behalf. All 847 of us." Webb appeared slightly startled. This was one of the few times she had seen an expression on his face that was not the controlled assessment or calm focus. "That's not necessary." "It is necessary," Sierra Vix said, "because what you did should not be punished, and because I want to understand something, and I believe your response to that tribunal will help me understand it." "What do you want to understand?" "Why," she said, "not the simple answer you gave me before. I understand that you were closest and you could try. I understand the math of 847 people versus 1 crew, but I want to know why the math works that way for you. Other ships received our signal. They calculated their distances and their capabilities and they transmitted their regrets. You calculated the same things and you came anyway. What is the difference?" Webb was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant thinking rather than avoiding. "I don't know if I can explain it in a way that translates," he said finally. "Humans have a thing, I don't know if other species have it in the same way, where when you know someone is in danger and you might be able to help, not doing anything feels worse than trying and failing. The other ships calculated that they couldn't reach you in time and made peace with that because the math said it was true. I couldn't make peace with it because the math wasn't finished yet." "You believed the math could change." "I believed the math hadn't been pushed hard enough yet. There's a difference between a problem that's impossible and a problem that looks impossible until someone sits down and finds the one path through it. Most impossible problems have a path. You just have to be willing to be uncomfortable looking for it." Sierra Vix thought about Kowalski sleeping on the floor, Chen memorizing xenobiology protocols on a cargo ship, Yuki calculating gravitational slingshots for a vessel she had never flown, Santos converting cooking equipment into oxygen recyclers, Webb working in a failing suit outside a hull in deep space because the math said 847 people required it. "Your crew," she said, "they all operate this way." "I hired for it," Webb said simply. "There are people who ask whether and people who ask how. I only hire people who ask how." She nodded. There was more she wanted to say, and she did not have words for it in any of the 7 languages she spoke. "Rest," she said instead. "You have a tribunal to attend, and I intend for you to be well enough to face it." "And the 847 testimony backup helps," he said, a slight smile. "Considerably," she agreed. The tribunal convened 6 weeks later on Velorum Station, a neutral ground acceptable to both the Human Shipping Authority and the Confederation regulatory body. The venue held perhaps 200 people comfortably. Over 600 showed up. The Horizon's Edge crew had organized themselves with a thoroughness that suggested they had been planning it since the rescue. Species that had never previously cooperated on administrative matters had coordinated testimony, translated documents, and arranged travel. The steadfast promises Captain Oren, who had arrived to find 847 people alive, because a cargo freighter had done the impossible, submitted a formal commendation that was 3 times longer than standard. The tribunal panel of 3, a Human Shipping Authority representative, a Confederation regulatory officer, and a neutral Zelthian mediator, heard 6 hours of testimony. Webb's violations were not in dispute. He had responded to a distress call with inadequate equipment, insufficient crew, and no authorization from any regulatory body. He had performed emergency modifications to another vessel without proper certification. He had authorized EVA operations under conditions that fell below minimum safety standards. 14 violations in total, all clearly documented. The testimony addressed not whether the violations occurred, but what they had resulted in. Dr. Relith, the Horizon's Edge Chief Medical Officer, testified that under standard response timelines, hypothermia-related conditions would have affected approximately 30% of the crew before the steadfast promise arrived, with potentially fatal outcomes for 8 to 12% of those affected due to species-specific vulnerabilities. Under the extended timeline that Webb's intervention had created, 0 crew members developed hypothermia. Chief Engineer Voss testified that the hull breach, undetected in the original damage assessment, would have caused catastrophic atmosphere loss approximately 4 hours before the steadfast promise arrived under the original timeline. This would have been unsurvivable for the majority of the consolidated crew. Yuki's gravitational slingshot calculations were presented by a Zelthian navigational expert who had reviewed them and described them as technically correct, tactically brilliant, and the kind of solution that experienced navigators fail to find because they have learned to work within conventional parameters rather than around them. Kowalski's life support repairs were reviewed by a Krell engineering board who submitted a written statement, noting that the repairs had been performed under conditions that would have made them impractical for most qualified engineers, and that the results exceeded what their own assessment suggested was achievable. Santos submitted her oxygen recycler documentation. The Confederation's chief environmental systems engineer read it with an expression of increasing bewilderment, and then testified that the improvised systems should not have worked by any principle he understood, and that he intended to research why they had. The 847 crew members of the Horizon's Edge gave testimony. Not all 847 individually, that would have taken days, but a rotating series of representatives from each species present, each telling the same story from their own position. What they had seen, what had happened, what the outcome had been. Commander Serovics testified last. She stood before the tribunal panel, and she said what she had been thinking for 6 weeks. Captain Webb violated 14 regulations. These regulations exist for good reasons. They are designed to prevent inadequately equipped vessels from attempting rescues that endanger the rescuers without helping the rescued. They reflect a reasonable understanding of what is and is not possible. What Captain Webb's crew demonstrated, she continued, is that this understanding, while reasonable, is incomplete. The regulations account for what is normally achievable. They do not account for humans who have decided that the problem will be solved. She looked at the panel. 847 beings are alive today because 6 humans refused to perform the calculation that every other vessel performed correctly and arrived at the correct answer of insufficient capability. They performed a different calculation. They asked how instead of whether, and in doing so they found a path that the regulations, quite reasonably, had not anticipated existing. I am not asking this tribunal to ignore the violations. They occurred. I am asking you to consider what those violations produced, and I am asking you to consider what it means for our galactic community that a cargo freighter with 6 crew members did what fully equipped vessels could not. She paused. The answer is not that Webb was reckless. He was precise. Every decision his crew made was assessed and implemented with complete technical competence. They did not ignore risk. They accepted it and managed it and worked within it because the alternative was allowing 847 people to die. The answer, Saravik said, is that humanity calculates differently from other species. Not incorrectly. Differently. They include in their calculation a factor that other species treat as fixed. What is possible? Humans do not treat this as fixed. They treat it as a variable that can be adjusted by willingness and ingenuity and refusal to accept initial parameters as final ones. This is either the most dangerous characteristic a species can have, she said, or the most valuable. After 6 weeks of thinking about it, I believe it is both, and I believe we are fortunate it exists. She sat down. The tribunal deliberated for 2 hours. The panel returned a verdict that found Webb guilty on all 14 counts. The Zelthian mediator read the sentence. On all 14 counts of regulatory violation, this tribunal finds Captain Marcus Webb guilty as charged. A pause. The tribunal further finds that these violations, while real and documented, resulted directly from an attempt to preserve 847 lives that would otherwise have been lost, and that the attempt succeeded through a combination of technical competence, crew excellence, and what this panel can only describe as an unreasonable but effective refusal to accept a problem as unsolvable. Sentencing is as follows: formal commendation for service to the galactic community, promotion within the human shipping authorities, volunteer rescue auxiliary to the rank of fleet captain, assignment to command of a new dedicated deep space rescue vessel to be constructed over the next 18 months. A murmur went through the assembled observers. Funding for this vessel has been contributed voluntarily by representatives of 11 species present in this chamber, in amounts totaling sufficient for full construction, equipment, and 10 years of operating costs. The vessel will carry full rescue certification and will operate under the remit of responding to distress calls throughout the deep space survey regions. The mediator looked up from the document. The vessel's name was submitted by Commander Saravix of the Horizon's Edge and has been approved by the contributing parties. Webb was looking at Saravix. She met his gaze. Someone had to, the mediator said. That is the ship's name. Someone had to. The chamber was very quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet at all. Saravix watched Webb's face. She had spent 6 weeks trying to understand humans, and she was not certain she had succeeded, but she understood this. He looked at the name of the ship, and he looked slightly uncomfortable with the recognition, and then he looked across the chamber at Kowalski and Yuki and Chen and Santos, his crew of 6 who had each asked how instead of whether, and the discomfort became something else. She wrote in her log that evening, I have studied humans for years. Read their history, their science, their literature. I thought I understood what they were. Today I learned the truth. Humans do not calculate odds before helping. This is not because they are irrational. They are, in fact, extraordinarily precise and technical. Kowalski's repairs were executed with exactness that senior engineers called exceptional. Yuki's trajectory was mathematically flawless. Chen's medical management under impossible conditions was reviewed and validated by 3 independent bodies. They calculate everything except one thing. They do not calculate whether to try. That part is not a calculation for them. It is a given. Someone needs help. You can try. Therefore you try. The math of survival and probability, of capability and resources and risk, all of that comes after. None of it overrides the initial axiom. This is why they are both the most terrifying and the most wonderful species I have encountered. Terrifying because a species that does not calculate whether to act is a species that will do things other species consider impossible, and sometimes those things are catastrophic. Their history is full of such moments. Wonderful because 847 of us are breathing tonight, because 6 of them turned around and came anyway. I named their ship Someone Had to because that is what Captain Webb said when I asked him why. Not we wanted to, not we felt obligated to. Someone had to, and we were there, so we were the someone. I do not know if I will ever fully understand humans, but I understand this. In the moments that matter most, when the math says it cannot be done, and the regulations say it should not be attempted, and every reasonable calculation points to standing down, there will be a human somewhere nearby asking how instead of whether. And that, I have come to believe, is the most important thing in the galaxy. Somewhere in deep space, the construction plans for a rescue vessel called Someone Had to were being finalized. It would carry full equipment, proper certification, a crew trained, and prepared for exactly the scenarios it would face. It would be commanded by a human who had learned, in a military career and a cargo career, and 6 weeks of tribunal aftermath, that the only calculation that truly mattered was the simplest one. Someone needs help, you can try. Therefore you try.